Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here. Got another Elestrals video for you. So, got another one of these countdown style videos for you. I figured we did it for the liths, so why not go through all 8 spirit types in Elestrals and take a look at the divine runes from each. The divine runes, of course, are going to be based on the ancient gods themselves, and they all have some very interesting effects. I think much like the liths, and in fact, maybe even more so than the liths. These are all, like, at least solid, if not good, cards. So even if whatever one I put at the bottom might be the quote-unquote worst divine rune, I don't think it's inherently a bad card. And of course, like with all these cards, they could definitely get better with time as future release is supported. If you end up liking this video, I do recommend that you check out my video where I also rank all of the liths going through each of the spirit types. Of course, like Lavalith, Heliolith, Arcolith, Coastalith, all those ones. So if you want to check that out, I'm going to go ahead and link that in the description below. Also, if you feel like checking out some deck profiles and or gameplay for Elestrals, then definitely go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because I am aiming to post, well, not maybe every single day. I do want to post multiple Elestrals videos a week. So if you're interested in seeing that, like I said, definitely please do make sure to subscribe and keep watching. That support really, really makes all of the difference. So thank you, each and every one of you. All right, let's go ahead and get on into these divine runes here. We're going to start off with number 8, the lowest of the divine runes, but like I said, this is definitely not a bad card. I think it really just needs some future support. It's going to be Hephaestus, and I don't think a lot of people are surprised to see this coming. So Hephaestus is the divine rune for fire that says when you cast this Hephaestus, you can enchant up to 3 fire to it. You can disenchant fire from this Hephaestus, a fire spirit that is, in order to search your deck for an artifact and add it to your hand. So of course that first sentence is going to be a common through line for all of the divine runes, right? They all, unlike a lot of other runes, they will stay face up on the field like stadiums after you cast them, but you cast them into the regular rune row. They come in with their initial 1 spirit, and then, as you know, they all mention, you can enchant additional spirits up to them. Then, once per turn, you can disenchant spirits from them to do a certain effect. So, for Hephaestus, it's going to be to search artifacts. While this is very flavorful, there are, I think, 2 main factors that make Hephaestus, so far, the worst of the divine runes. And, you know, as always, future cards could come out that will make, change this and make this not as applicable. But I think the first factor is simply the fact that the role of Hephaestus is to search artifact runes. As currently in the game, artifact runes are not that great in general, and certainly not a lot of decks want to centralize their strategy around them. It also kind of sucks that, like, Argo came out in Daybreak, which is a 2 spirits counter rune that's an omni rune, so you can use 2 spirits of any type. When battle is declared, you can cast, or you can play an artifact rune directly from your deck. So it's like, yeah, like, and this is kind of the other issue too, is that, like, fire doesn't have a lot of inherent artifact synergy. In fact, most of the artifact synergy is actually in earth, with a little bit in solar as well, which is a little bit awkward for Hephaestus to not, for his color to not really, again, care that much about artifacts. Or I can't really think of a standout fire artifact that's, like, really worth searching. Of course, there is Hammer of Hephaestus does exist, but there are definitely better artifacts than that out there. So I think these factors are going to make Hephaestus currently the worst divine rune. Still not that bad of a card, but it's like, again, if you want to search you don't really need to search artifacts in fire that badly. And if you want to search artifacts in other decks, you could just play Argo instead of splashing fire just to search stuff. So, okay, so at number 7, and I actually had a hard time picking basically numbers 3 through 7. Like, Hephaestus I locked in at 8 pretty quickly, and numbers 1 and 2, the best and second best divine runes, I actually locked those in, I think, fairly quickly as well. These other 5 are way up in the air. I could definitely see some people seeing Poseidon appear on the screen here and be like, what? There's no way Poseidon is the second worst Divine Rune. I'm going to explain my reasoning why I think that, but if you want to make an argument otherwise, I wouldn't even be opposed to it. I think that almost any of the other 5 rune or Divine Runes I'm thinking of could be anywhere between number 3 and 7. So for Poseidon, the main reason I'm putting Poseidon at number 7 is that it just doesn't see play in a lot of different kinds of strategies. Poseidon's main role is to cheat 1 Spirit Elestrals into 3 Spirit Elestrals, right? Because you have your 1 Spirit Elestral out with its spirit, then Poseidon can can nexus a water from itself to the Elestral. Oh, sorry, let me read Poseidon too. Poseidon, of course, the Water Divine Rune, costs 1 water. When you cast this Poseidon, you can enchant up to 3 water to it. You can nexus 1 water from this Poseidon. So, yeah, the idea is you have a 1 Spirit Elestral, you nexus the water from Poseidon to that Elestral, and then you can ascend from that 1 Spirit Elestral directly to a 3. And that's pretty much entirely what Poseidon is used for. The 2 most popular ways it's used is in Chronodile, of course, to, ascend into the Chronodile off of a 1 Spirit Water or like a Plucky or something, right? And then in the quote-unquote 15s deck, which aims to just cheat out a misenchanted Penterror, just to have the 15 attack stat body on the board and kind of take control of the board state that way. So, yeah, I mean, besides from that, I mean, of course there are other good ways to use Poseidon, right? There are some good water receivers like Dratagwa and a Pharos. A Pharos is a water nexus, not a receiver, but in any case, it's not like Poseidon doesn't have use in water decks, it just doesn't really see play in water-focused decks. Again, the only decks it really seems to see play in are ones that are using it to cheat out a 3 Spirit Elestral. Maybe as water gets another good receiver, or cares more about nexusing in general, this card make it better. But I still suspect it'll have meta relevance for, again, its ability to cheat out big stuff, if nothing else. Alright, so next up we have Kihone, who is the Water Divine Rune. So for 1 Frost Spirit, she says when you cast this Kihone, you can enchant up to 3 Frost Spirits to it. You can disenchant 1 Frost Spirit from this Kihone in order to return a 1 Spirit Frost Celestial from your underworld to your hand. So, the use here, I think, is pretty obvious because if you know anything about Frost, it's that it really likes to put its own cards into the graveyard, especially from the deck. Indeed, when we looked at the Lith tier list, we talked a lot about Morlith, which does this, milling the top 5 cards of your own deck to the graveyard. So, Kihone is very nice in a deck like that, which is, of course, going to be able to get back those 1 Spirit Frost Elestrals. I think the main problem with Kihone, and the main reason she doesn't see more play in those like Morlith builds, is the simple fact that Infrostrix exists. So, Infrostrix is a 1 Frost Spirit Elestral that's a 2/3 that says you can discard this Infrostrix and expend 2 Frost Spirits to special cast a 1 Frost Spirit Elestral from your underworld. So, I mean, you can already kind of probably see what the issue here is. Why use Kihone to return it to your hand when you could just use the Infrostrix to special cast it, right? And honestly, there's not really very many answers to that question. I guess the Kihone is technically cheaper, or if you want to do that effect over multiple turns, then it would be better the Infrostrix, but just the fact that the Infrostrix can special cast it, so you can still normal cast a different Elestral from your hand, or ascend over the 1 spirit that you brought back, right, etc., etc., I think just makes it, like, pretty nicely, puts it pretty nicely above the Kihone. In fact, the more I think about it, I do kind of wish I'd put Kihone at number 7 and Poseidon at 6. As I'm thinking about it right now, I think if I was able to go back and rechange it, or change it in general, I guess redo it, then I would probably make that change. That said, Kihone has seen some play in successful tournament-topping Frost builds, so she's not a bad card. It's just like, again, a lot of the time, it's like, why play this when Infrostrix exists? So, hopefully she doesn't continue to have that issue moving forward. If she does, there might be a world where Kihone just slips down to the worst Divine Rune. I could see that happening, potentially. Okay, so coming in at number 5, we've got Apollo, the Solar Divine. For 1 Solar Spirit, says when you cast this Apollo, you can enchant up to 3 Solar Spirits to it. You can disenchant 1 Solar Spirit from this Apollo in order to foretell 3 and add up to 1 Elestral foretold this way to your hand. So foretell, for those who don't know, is to basically look at the top 3 cards of your deck and then put them back later in the same order. So the idea is you disenchant a solar, you look at the top 3, you can pick a solar Elestral among those 3 cards, put it in your hand, and then put the 3 back, or the remaining cards in general, back on top of your deck in the same order. So Apollo does end up being pretty important to the solar strategy. There are cards that care about Apollo. I think there are cards that care specifically about every Divine Rune. Well, at least most of them. But there are a lot of cards that care about Apollo and Apollo foretelling cards, and also foretelling in general is just something that the solar spirits do want to do a lot of. So Apollo does end up being pretty important a lot of the time, like I said, in these solar builds. That said, I do think there are better Divine Runes that search cards. We're going to talk about one very soon here. Because one thing about Apollo that I don't really like is that you can potentially fail to find. That is, you can look at your top 3, not see a Solar Spirit, and then have to put them back. So this is the only Divine Rune that can potentially use its effect and have nothing happen, but that is pretty rare, because usually a lot of solar decks will be playing a lot of, well, any solar deck that's playing Apollo is going to be playing a lot of solar Elestrals, and solar decks in general play a lot of solar Elestrals. Yeah, I think Apollo is, like, fine. We'll see in the future as more solar cards out if it becomes as mandatory for its type. I will say that Apollo is also one of those Divine Runes. It's, like, very defined by its own spirit type, right? Like, Poseidon, you know, can, and definitely does, see play outside of dedicated water decks, right? Whereas Apollo is only ever really going to see play in a dedicated solar deck. So a lot of how good Apollo is also depends on how good those dedicated solar decks end up being. That said, solar decks right now are, like, fine, if not at least, you know, kind of good. And Apollo does see play in, like, literally every single one of them. So for now, I think a pretty good Divine Rune. And coming in at number 4 is actually going to be that other Divine Rune that searches that I alluded to, Aeolus. So Aeolus is a 1 Wind Spirit Divine Rune that says when you cast this Aeolus, you can enchant up to 4 Wind Spirits to it, and I believe it's the only Divine Rune that lets you enchant up to 4 instead of 3. It's also the only one that disenchants 2 to activate its effect. It says you can disenchant 2 Wind Spirits from this Aeolus in order to search your deck for an Elestral with enchantment cost Wind and add it to your hand. So here's the thing, right? I think that Aeolus is, like, slightly better than Apollo in general, although whether Wind or Solar is a better deck is going to be metagame and, you know, card pool dependent, right? At this current moment, I think Wind and Solar decks are, like, pretty evenly on par with one another in terms of power level. But the reason I like Aeolus a little better than the Apollo is the fact that it does just guarantee you get the search. Now, it is more expensive. That is, of course, going to be the kind of drawback, right? But actually getting to pick up your deck, look through it, and pick the Wind Elestral that you want to add to your hand, as opposed to foretelling the top 3 and hoping that there's a good solar in there, I think generally tends to be a lot better. I'm also personally not the biggest fan of foretell as a mechanic. Like, I don't think it's inherently flawed. I just personally don't like foretelling, mostly because, like, you're basically telling your opponent, like, what's on top of your deck, which, if you're foretelling a lot over the course of a long game, your opponent's basically going to know at any given point what you have access to, and that's not something I'm personally a huge fan of, but anyway, going back to talking about Aeolus, yeah, I think the ability to search Wind Elestrals is, of course, quite good. I think the main thing holding Aeolus back is, of course, that it's more expensive, but I think it also needs to be more expensive, right? I think it needs to disenchant 2 to activate this effect, otherwise it would just be better than pretty much all the other Divine Runes. So, yeah, the drawback that it's a little pricey, I don't know. I think it's fine. You could make the argument that Apollo is better because it's cheaper, And I wouldn't even necessarily argue against it. There's also the fact that Solar has Exaltus to search, so it doesn't need a dedicated search as badly. But that's kind of where I struggled between. I did struggle a bit between Aeolus and Apollo in general, trying to evaluate, like, okay, do I evaluate the Divine Room relative to the decks that are currently playing it, or do I evaluate them in a vacuum? In the end, I kind of split the difference. I did a little bit of both, but I guess I'm leaning more towards the vacuum evaluation because I do think that in a vacuum, Aeolus is definitely better. But that said, I think that Wind and Solar are about as good as each other. So it's close either way. All right, coming in at number 3, and this one's a little bit speculative, although this card has seen some tournament play, tournament topping play in side decks, if nothing else. That's going to be Artemis. So Artemis is not officially out yet, but it is legal to play because the statue version of Artemis has already been made available in Shattered Stars, and those lunar cards that came in that preview Shattered Stars pack are tournament legal. Again, that does include the Artemis here. So Artemis is the Lunar Divine Rune for 1 Lunar, and it says when you cast this Artemis, you can enchant up to 3 Lunar to it. You can disenchant Lunar from this Artemis in order to target an opponent's face-up card and suppress it until the opponent's next end phase. So, while this card hasn't seen a lot of play just yet, I think that's mostly just because Lunar as a whole hasn't been released yet, officially. And of course, once Moonrise comes out, this card will drop in her non-statue forms as well. But I think Artemis is quite good. So Suppression basically just means that card essentially is treated as having no effects. And in a lot of ways, because the suppression lasts until the opponent's next end phase, this is kind of a removal tool. I mean, think about it this way, right? Let's say your opponent has their own Divine Rune in play. It could be any of them. I don't know. Apollo. Why not? You play your Artemis. You use Artemis to suppress the Apollo. And then, because it's until your opponent's next end phase, they can't use it during their turn. Meaning, it's going to come back to your next turn without them being able to use the card that they suppressed. That can, of course, apply to Stadiums, to shut off boosting. That can apply, of course, to Elestrals as well. So, definitely a lot of good potential there. Lunar also cares very much about suppression. A lot of the cards have suppression payoff, or that is to say they want you to suppress your opponent's cards in order to get a big effect, like the Necrolith is a pretty good example. So the Artemis is definitely, of course, going to be extremely important in that style of deck for triggering those effects. But that said, like I just said, I don't even think that just triggering those effects is what makes Artemis good. I think it's the fact that the standalone effect is already so good, and then activating this already good standalone effect is going to make the rest of your cards so much better. Now, like I said, this is highly speculative. I was a little weary about putting the most recent Divine Rune in number 3, especially because, like I said, a lot of the payoff for playing this rune hasn't come out yet. In tournaments, it's only seen play in side decks, but I think the fact this card sees side deck play without any payoff, and also without Lunar being, like, a lot of decks aren't main decking Lunar Spirits, because aside from Spectaris and Dense Fog and, like, Drakking, there's not any Lunar cards, like, in the card pool in general that are really seeing competitive play. So I think that's one of the main reasons why, when it has seen tournament play so far, it's been sideboarded. As Lunar becomes more of a thing when Moonrise comes out, and you'll see more Lunar Splash decks, I would definitely expect that you'll see more Artemises moving forward. Alright, so now we're closing in on the top 2 Divine Runes. Like I said, while 3 through 7 were kind of up in the air, you could really make arguments for any of those runes being at any of those numbers. These 2 I was very confident in. Number 2, the second best Divine Rune currently in the game, in my opinion, is going to be Demeter, the Earth Divine Rune. For 1 Earth Spirit, she says, when you cast this Demeter, you can enchant up to 3 Earth Spirits to it. You can disenchant Earth from this Demeter in order to give +3 attack and +3 defense to an Elestral until the end phase. So, wow. +3/+3 is a huge buff to give in Elestrals, right? There's not really that many effects that give stat buffs in general. Most of them are just going to be the Stadiums that give +1/+1. There's Don't Poke the Bear, which is +4/+4, but, and then, of course, also, like the various, artifacts, too. but Demeter's +3/+3. I mean, that's massive. It lets pretty much any of your 1-Spirit Elestrals run over, not even just any other 1-Spirit Elestral, but they can also take on a lot of 2 or maybe even sometimes 3-Spirit Elestrals as well with that kind of a buff, right? Demeter is so good that Earth Nexus decks will play Elechick, a Thunder Spirit card, just to search out the Demeter. And Elechick searching Demeter is actually a great play no matter whether you go first or second, if you think about it, right? Because if you go first, you have the Demeter in your hand to help you with follow-up plays. And if you go second, you can summon the Elechick and then play the Demeter. Demeter's effect on Elechick, that'll make it a 7/4, which makes it very capable of running over, like I said, most given Elestrals you'll see on the board in the current meta. Earth's deck in particular, Earth Nexus, as the name implies, also does care a lot about nexusing, so having such a good card that also acts as a Nexus bank is, of course, continues to be quite good, further boosting the Demeter's power level with an already inherently very strong effect. Yeah, Demeter, excellent card. It sees play in, literally every single Earth deck. That's the reason why I put it towards the top, because, I guess Apollo sees play in every single Solar deck, but Demeter is such a more strong effect, and, while not every deck playing Earth cards would necessarily play Aeolus, same for Frost and Kione, so on and so forth, every dedicated Earth deck is definitely going to be on Demeter. And that just leaves number 1, the Thunder Divine Spirit. That's going to be Zeus. Zeus is 1 Thunder Spirit. That says when you cast a Zeus, you can enchant up to 3 Thunder Spirits to it. You can disenchant Thunder from the Zeus in order to target an opponent's Celestial and give it -3 attack and -3 defense until the end phase. So, if you saw Demeter at number 2, it's probably not a surprise that Zeus is in number 1. They are, for all intents and purposes, very, very similar cards, but there are a few reasons why Zeus is better. 1, giving an opponent Celestial -3/-3, generally speaking, is better than giving one of your Elestrals +3/+3, right? Because it means that you have the potential to run that opponent's Celestial over with multiple of yours, right? Let's say your opponent has an Elestral that you want to battle over and 1 face-down card. You have 2 Elestrals that are within 3 attack of being able to battle over it. If you play Demeter and buff one of your dudes and try to battle into it, and your opponent ends up having a Shield of Achilles, well, now you can't battle over your opponent's dude, right? Because your 1 buffed Elestral, it got bounced back to your hand. However, Zeus giving their Elestral -3/-3 lets either of your Elestrals battle over it, meaning that the shield doesn't matter as much, because even if it bounces one of your Elestrals, the other will still be able to battle over your opponent's dude. That's a very basic kind of explanation of why the -3/-3 on their dude tends to be, not always, but tends to be better than +3/+3 on yours. Furthermore, Zeus being Thunder is also highly relevant because, like I said, this kind of effect is strong enough that you already want to be playing a Thunder card like Elechick to search it. So the fact that Elechick is already a Thunder card, and of course that's the same as Zeus, that means you don't have to go out of your way to play Elechick in order to search this. Zeus also has the Volt Tempest, which cares specifically about it, and that is actually very, very good payoff for the Volt Tempest to have the Zeus in play. But even outside of dedicated Zeus or even dedicated Thunder decks, I think Zeus might be, except for some very fringe cases for Demeter, I think Zeus might just be, well, and Artemis as well. Aside from Demeter and Artemis, the second and third best Divine Runes that we just talked about, Zeus is probably the only one that sees a decent amount of play outside of his Spirit's deck. It's not often, but there are a few non-Thunder decks that will still play enough Thunder to end up playing the Zeus, right? Often decks that are playing Astrabbit and Boombat, and of course the Elechick to search the Zeus as well. It also, of course, definitely helps too that Thunder is, in my opinion, probably just the most powerful deck of the current format. The Divine Rune that has arguably the strongest effect, being in arguably the strongest Spirit type right now, definitely doesn't hurt the argument of putting Zeus at the number 1 spot either. So there we go. Those are all 8 of the current Divine Runes ranked in order from worst to best. But what do you think? What do you think is the worst Divine Rune, and which one do you think is the best? Definitely feel free to let me know in the comments section below. I'm very eager to hear from you on that. But for now, I'm going to get going. So thanks as always as ever for watching. Watching towards the end of the video is a great way to support the channel, so I really, really do appreciate that. If you want to support in other ways, you can definitely check out links in the description below for my Patreon, as well as my main YouTube channel where I talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. Feel free to check those out. Subscribing, like I said, is a huge, very helpful way to support as well. So thank you to everyone who is doing that. But that's going to do it for this one. This is HexLex. I am signing out, and also hoping that you have a fantastic day.